All praises to the Most High, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Raha Kwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, laboring in this truth in all sincerity. Psalms chapter 28, verses 4 and 5 in the NLT. Give them the punishment they so richly deserve. Measure it out in proportion to their wickedness. Pay them back for all their evil deeds. Give them a taste of what they have done to others. They care nothing for what Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai has done, or for what his hands have made, so he will tear them down, and they will never be rebuilt. This is an article that I came across a little bit earlier from a news app. This article was published approximately 2 hours ago by an individual by the name of Jordan Collins. Donald Trump goes full villain, declares Wells a threat to national security, calls on his quote-unquote God Squad to eliminate them. I'm not going to read the entire article, only about the first 4 to 5 paragraphs here. Another day, another reason to label Donald Trump a villain. This time, the president is going after an endangered species of whale because their mere existence interferes with his plans to plunder oil from the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of America. This week saw high-ranking officials in Trump's cabinet known as the God Squad vote to end regulations that would protect the species known as Rice's whale, of which there are only 50 left in existence. According to CNN, the Endangered Species Act, ESA, stood in the way of oil and gas operations in the area with the intention of protecting species in the area. Rice's whale was brought to the brink of extinction due to the BP oil spill in 2010, but thanks to the ESA, the 50 or so remaining whales have been able to cling on. Now, with the unanimous vote to create an exemption to the act, allowing for drilling in the Gulf, we could see this rare species and many others in the area go extinct. What is the God Squad? The God Squad is a panel consisting of 6 high-ranking federal officials who sit on the Endangered Species Committee. They have the ability to decide on exemptions from the ESA, essentially choosing whether it's all right to allow a species to die or not. Pat Parental, a law professor at Vermont Law School, explained, "It literally has the power of life or death. The panel is playing God, which is what earned them the name in the first place." So I want to stop right there. This particular quote-unquote God Squad, which is the Federal Endangered Species Committee, was created back in 1978. And just as we've read, it basically has the authority to override any environmental protections. That nickname, the God Squad, literally comes from their ability to pretend or to play God by deciding on whether or not to proceed with or at least cast aside any type of federal project that could eliminate any endangered species. In this particular case, this same panel voted to exempt oil and gas drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, which now bypasses the Endangered Species Act protections. And there are approximately 50 rice whales remaining. I also wanted to see what other wildlife was in the Gulf of Mexico, what could possibly be facing extinction here. So I asked the Google AI overview, how many species of animals are affected by the God Squad's latest ruling about drilling in the Gulf of Mexico? Based on the March 31st, 2026 ruling by the Endangered Species Committee, often referred to as the God Squad, more than 24 species, at least 20 to 30 plus of endangered or threatened marine and coastal animals are affected by the exemption from the Endangered Species Act to expand oil and gas drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. So some of those particular species are the rice whale, as we've already read about. Sea turtles, all 5 endangered sea turtle species found in the Gulf are at risk. Kemp's Ridley, green leatherback, loggerhead, and hawksbill. Other species threatened and endangered other species threatened and endangered species include the giant manta ray, oceanic white-tip shark, Gulf sturgeon, manatees, and various coral species. Examples given: elkhorn and mountainous star coral. The context: the God Squad voted 6-0 to allow the expansion, citing national security reasons related to energy supplies. The decision allows oil and gas companies to operate without having to take protective measures for these animals. So basically, the God Squad is saying screw them, even though there's only approximately 50 left of these rice wells. Is basically screw them. We need to start drilling for oil. And this is even though they've already taken Venezuela's oil. You know, Trump can say that, Nero can say all he wants that we're not going to really take their oil, but we know what's going on there. There's all types of backroom deals and stuff. They basically had one guy taken out. He's now sitting in a New York prison awaiting trial. You have another leader installed who's basically going to bend the knee to whatever Trump wants. And Venezuela is going to be coming up off that oil very soon here. So even though you've already gotten Venezuela's oil, basically what Trump is doing is trying to force all of these other nations now to buy oil from the U.S. So with that situation that's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, that strait is still closed. I believe the only nations that can pass through are India and China. I'm not too certain on Russia, but I believe Russia also can pass through. But don't quote me on that. I could be incorrect there. But everyone else who depends on that strait for their oil, they're basically at Iran's mercy. Iran is going to start naming all types of prices now. It's like when Marlo said in the wire, the price of the brick going up. With more risk, you're going to increase your prices now. Now that there's a chance that this may get bombed over here, we gotta you gotta spend more money for us to allow you to come through this strait. That's basically what Iran is going to do. So what the U.S. is trying to do is it basically has taken Venezuela. It's already threatening Cuba and Colombia. They've already taken a piece of Greenland. So if you look at all of these countries and their oil supplies, the U.S. is basically setting up shop here. While the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the U.S. is basically going into all of these nations now, including now starting to drill in the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, and really don't even care what endangered species or animals are down there that's contributing to the ecosystem. So in addition to these particular countries, there's also Canada that the U.S. is trying to force into submission as well. We know that Canada has plenty of, oil up that way. So, and all of this is basically, they're basically now following in the footsteps of what the state of Israel is doing when it comes to this whole concept of greater Israel. It's the same thing that Nero is doing over here on this side with greater America. So he's coming down, now he's trying to take control of Greenland, Canada. He already had Alaska is already, the 50th state. So there's Greenland, Canada, the U.S., and then you start going down, you'll eventually try to get parts of Mexico and then all the way down into Venezuela, as well as the islands such as Cuba and Colombia as well. So this is all part of the Greater America Project, just as Israel is trying for the Greater Israel Project. So he's basically gone from MAGA to Greater America here. And by doing this, you can start naming your price to these desperate nations who are relying on oil, but they're at a disadvantage because the Strait of Hormuz is blocked. So countries that are reliant upon the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. doesn't get any oil from Iran. So what the U.S. is figuring now is, hey, it's time for us to lock up all of uh, these oil fields over on this side of the hemisphere. We lock up all of this now, and now we can, while that strait over there is closed, we can allow Israel to keep bombing them. And that's going to keep that closed. What you do is you force these other countries now to buy oil from the U.S. So the crazy thing about this is, I laugh at this guy, Nero. To me, he's funny. He'll say some clown stuff sometimes, and I find myself just laughing about it. But based on what you're seeing happening right here, you know, if you're really paying attention to the board and you see what Israel is trying to do with greater Israel, what the US is trying to do with greater America now, and you pay attention to how they did this, where you have the state of Israel that basically pulled America into this. But I don't know if Trump is discalculating himself, or maybe if he has like A-list group of like strategic thinkers around him. But this is something to keep an eye on because, like I said, the longer that strait remains closed, the more these countries are going to become desperate. And Trump is kind of forcing a lot of these countries now to do business with them. So like I said, it's hard for me to believe Trump is discalculating, because at surface level, it looks like it's a mess over there. Oh man, you got yourself into a big mess over there with the Strait of Hormuz. No, what if that was the actual intention? Regardless of if that was actually planned that way, or if it just morphed into that. They started, okay, sometimes when you play chess, you move a piece, your strategy was kind of bad, you have to regroup really fast. And I'm starting to wonder now, just watching this, what if this was the actual intention? Cause as much chaos in that particular region as possible. Now you force all of your allies, especially European nations and some of those Asian nations, instead of buying their oil from Iran, now you're forced to get that oil from the U.S., which is in the midst of its own endeavors, once again, with this whole concept now of greater America, which would be taking some of Greenland's oil, Canada's. You have your own oil reserves here in the U.S., the Gulf of Mexico now, Cuba, Colombia, Venezuela. So, like I said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he just has some list of like real A-list strategists on his team, but it's just something to keep an eye on. The U.S. we know it's going to eventually fall, but we're starting to see this devil come down with great wrath here. So this is why we're going to see the beast is going to really start hating the whore now. You see how the U.S. is trying to back everyone into a corner. So the U.S. is threatening to leave NATO altogether, knowing that those European nations can't deal with Russia. So with the U.S. making those type of threats, and now you have their oil supply being limited, the U.S. is trying to force these these European nations into dealing with them when it comes to oil, because the Strait of Hormuz may be closed for a little while, at least to America's so-called allies. Like I was mentioning a few seconds ago, I should say, this kind of brings me into Revelation chapter 17. And I'll read verses 15 through 18 in the KJV. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, and are peoples, and multitudes, and nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest in that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And I'll read that last verse one more time. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So we're seeing right now Babylon is making moves. Whether Trump is the mastermind behind all of this, or he has, like I said earlier, he has like an A-list team of strategists over here, all of a sudden, depending on how things turn out, in these next few weeks in Iran, if he pulls out of Iran, but he's able to secure the the Western Hemisphere over here, as far as oil fields, that's starting to look, at least to me, that's starting to look like the plan all along here. Or maybe it wasn't the plan all along. Maybe they had to call an audible like in football, but nonetheless, it's not looking as botched if you're looking at this long term, but not too long term, because we know that eventually Babylon loses. But if you're looking at this, let's say you're looking at this a month down the road, 2 months, 3 months down the road, you're looking at this as if you're starting to see what the play is now. You cause as much chaos and disruption over there at the Strait of Hormuz. All of your allies now, they're short on oil, which they need. Now you force them to get that oil from the U.S. So this dude is trying to snatch up everything, and this is why the entire earth is going to rejoice, when Esau Edom falls, and even going back to the original, topic of what I was talking about here, this whole concept of, the God Squad, it made me think of Ezekiel chapter 35. I'm going to start at verse 13 and read 14. Thus with your mouth ye have boasted against me, and have multiplied your words against me. I have heard them. Thus saith the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, when the whole earth rejoiceth, I will make thee desolate. And I'll read that in the NLT as well. And saying that you boasted proudly against me, and I have heard it all. This is what the sovereign Lord, Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, says. The whole world will rejoice when I make you desolate. And that's like, when you read verse 13, and saying that you boasted proudly against me, and you look at this particular panel here, the God Squad, this is the Most High's creation. The Most High created this earth and everything on it. But now you have this group of people over here now that's part of Trump's cabinet that's calling themselves the God Squad, and they're basically calling the shots on which particular species of animals can remain alive or become extinct. So, the Most High sees all of this, and right now he's hardening their hearts even more. These dudes ain't showing any signs of slowing down, at least for the time being. With all that stuff that's going on over there, Trump is stating, hey, we'll be out of there in 2 to 3 weeks. Trust and believe me when I say this. Trump is in no rush to have that strait reopened. Even if Trump pulls the U.S. troops out of there, which he's not, but even if he was to do that, he's still going to allow, he's not going to say anything to the state of Israel if they constantly keep bombing over there. Trump wants as much chaos and confusion over there as possible so that these other nations will be reliant on the U.S. as they try to expand their influence in the Western Hemisphere by snatching up as many oil fields as they can on this side over here. So, all of these other nations right now, they're feeling this. They're feeling this devil's actions. And it's having a ripple effect across the globe. And that includes the not just people, but the entire ecosystem is affected. When animals or any species becomes extinct, it affects the ecosystem. So, With that being said, let me go to an article here real fast. I'm not going to read this entire article though. Just want to go back to this thing about the God Squad. This is off of Time Magazine, time.com. This was published, it looks like March 31st, 226, or a couple of days ago. And I'm going to scroll down to the point. What is the God Squad? The Endangered Species Committee was created in 1978 as a part of an amendment to the Endangered Species Act, signed into law 5 years earlier. The committee was established to create a process for carving out potential exemptions to the law, which agencies may apply for if the jeopardy that is expected to result from a proposed agency action cannot be avoided and the agency proposing the action nonetheless wishes to go ahead with the action, according to the Endangered Species Act primer from the Congressional Research Service. The committee can decide to grant an exemption despite future harm to a species. Per the primer, at least 5 votes are required to pass an exemption. The God Squad had previously reached decisions on just 3 applications for exemptions over the course of more than 4 decades. I'll stop there. Let me go to a video that I wanted to play. And I believe it was this one here, Instagram.
The so-called God Squad has just approved the first ever national security exemption from the Endangered Species Act. Here's why that matters. The Endangered Species Committee is a rarely used federal panel with the power to override wildlife protections, even if they risk pushing a species toward extinction, hence the name God Squad. The committee met this week for the first time since 1992 and voted to exempt all Gulf oil and gas operations from the Endangered Species Act. The exemption was requested by the Department of Defense after Secretary Pete Hegseth said the threat of litigation over oil and gas in the Gulf threatens national security. He told the committee that lawsuits could shut down Gulf production, including about 15% of U.S. crude oil. The panel only reduced endangered species protections once before and never for national security, making this decision highly unusual and closely watched. Environmental groups say this approval could have serious consequences for the Gulf's most vulnerable wildlife, including the critically endangered Rice's whale. Fewer than 51 are believed to remain after decades of industrial activity and oil spills. Now that the exemption is approved, we'll be watching to see how it will be implemented and whether it holds up in court. The so-called God Squad.
All right, so you just heard that. Basically, pretty much reiterated everything I just went over. And this didn't just start with Nero. These devils have been trying to destroy the Most High's creation. Esau, Edom really can't live in harmony with anyone or any species. That's this man's blessing. This man's blessing was the sword. And right now, he's swinging that sword. He's swinging it. So he's doing this though. Notice he's ramping up everything right now, and that's because he knows he has but a short time. So he's desperately trying to hold on to his kingdom here. Not only hold on to it, but he wants to extend this nation's deadline, but he can't. So all he really can do is cause as much hell as he can do on this earth. Leave as much death and destruction in his wake, And like I said, this all goes back to, he knows he has but a short time. He's coming down with great wrath right now. And it's not just on other nations. The entire ecosystem, from plants, animals, they're all feeling this right now. Everyone is about to feel it for a little while. As a matter of fact, we can go into Revelation 12:12 real fast. I'll read that scripture. Revelation 12:12 in the KJV. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. So with that being said, I'm going to end this with Psalms chapter 37. I'm going to read verses 12 through 20 to end it. And I'm going to read this in the NLT. The wicked plot against the godly, they snarl at them in defiance. But Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai just laughs, for he sees their day of judgment coming. The wicked draw their swords and string their bows to kill the poor and the oppressed, to slaughter those who do right. But their swords will stab their own hearts, and their bows will be broken. It is better to be godly and have little than to be evil and rich, for the strength of the wicked will be shattered, but Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai takes care of the godly. Day by day, Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai takes care of the innocent, and they will receive an inheritance that lasts forever. They will not be disgraced in hard times. Even in famine, they will have more than enough, but the wicked will die. Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai's enemies are like flowers in the field. They will disappear like smoke. I pray this has been edifying and reaches the ears it's supposed to reach. Shalom.